We have our second nomination for review, which is the Jim Pepper House in Portland. And it's also in Multnomah County.
So the Jim Pepper House, located in Portland, Oregon, is east of I-205 and just north of I-84 in the Park Roads neighborhood. It's surrounded by mid-20th century residential development. The nomination argues a period of significance beginning in 1949, which is the year that the artist moved to the property with his parents as a young boy, and it ends in 1971, the year the seminal album Pepper's Pow Wow was recorded and released. That period encompasses his early development as a performing artist, as well as his early instruction in traditional Native American music, which he would later incorporate into his jazz and jazz rock fusion compositions. This 22-year span encompasses Pepper's upbringing in the house, his early education in his own heritage, and his first forays into the performing arts, as well as his later development as a jazz musician and composer. As an adult, Pepper returned to the house regularly for weeks or months at a time. He composed several of the tracks on Pepper's Pow Wow with his father, Gilbert, while staying in the house, and he would regularly hold band practice and host notable musicians there when visiting Portland. The Jim Pepper House is under consideration at the local level under criterion B in the areas of ethnic heritage and performing arts for Pepper's significance as an innovator of both jazz rock fusion and world music. Pepper is internationally renowned for his compositions melding popular jazz music with rock, folk, and especially traditional Native American music. He was posthumously granted the Lifetime Musical Achievement Award by First Americans in the Arts in 1999. And he was inducted into the Native American Music Awards Hall of Fame in 2000. Regarding alterations to the property, the nomination notes that the most significant ones that occurred after the period of significance were in 1977. There was a rear addition, and there was a removal of the associated garage, a removal of a rear deck, and some landscaping activities that were related to a 2002 partition of the property. Despite changes to minor interior finishes like paint color, the building's interior organization and most finishes remain largely intact. In particular, the living room where Pepper frequently entertained fellow musicians and wrote music with his father retains original features. So in summary, the nomination that you are considering is making a case for criterion B in the areas of ethnic heritage and performing arts. And then the other thing to consider is whether the integrity of this property reflects that criterion B argument, as well as Jim Pepper's significance. As far as comments received for this nomination, we did not receive any public comments within the required submittal deadline. With our new rule, there's kind of some outline time of when we need to receive comments to be able to provide them to you as a committee. The idea, so it's not last minute and we're handing them to you right now. But we did, after that deadline, did receive comments from the CLG, so we do have those from them, but they're not provided to you. Does the committee have any questions for me related to the nomination?
Could you share the CLG comments to us?
Off the top of my, I don't have them in front of me, but they did recommend it. There weren't any major concerns or revisions that they had. So.
Are there any people who wish to speak?
We do have two individuals that have signed up ahead of time. We have the preparer, Caitlin, again. And Sean Cruz, the owner of the property. There are favorite viewers. Okay, I think Katie.
Are there any questions of staff about the nomination?
Hi, I think I just got to a panelist. Cool, thanks. So hello again. For the record, my name is Caitlin Ewers, and I'm also the preparer of the nomination for the Pepper House. This was a really incredible project to be involved with because so many people who had a personal relationship with Jim Pepper who performed with him, who like knew and loved him as a family member and as a friend, were able to participate in the nomination through oral history interviews. So Jim Pepper's nephew, James Pepper Henry, who's the vice chair of the Kaw Nation, as well as the executive director of the First Americans Museum in Oklahoma City, shared some stories about his uncle's time at the Pepper House. And he really impressed on me the significance of this place to Pepper's lifelong development as an artist. One thing he told me was that the house was, quote, the center of the universe to Jim Pepper. So this was like really his place. This was where he first learned to play saxophone. This is where he spent time with his parents learning about his Kaw and Muskogee Creek heritage. It's where he came back as an adult and practiced with his band. And it's where he always returned in times of like emotional turmoil or exhaustion for a spiritual and creative reset. Other people who shared their stories with this nomination were the musicians who played with him, both in Portland and across the country, including Gordon Lee, Ron Steen, Tom Grant, and Bob Moses. And they all shared some critical evaluations of his sound, which was really important in establishing in Section 8 just how revolutionary and talented Jim Pepper was from the perspective of his peers. I also spoke to his lifelong friend, Steve Riddle, who offered some insight into Pepper's early influences and his relationship with his parents, and also some personal anecdotes about his like kind of mischievous nature growing up and his fierce love for his family and his passion for life, which is so prominent in his music. I also had the opportunity to interview two other Indigenous artists for this project, Ed Edmo, Shoshone Bannock, who's a local poet and storyteller, and Sandy Osawa Nakaw, who is an award-winning filmmaker in Seattle and who produced a documentary about Jim Pepper in the 1990s. So the context provided by these narrators, supplemented by recorded interviews with Jim Pepper and by critical articles evaluating his music and newspaper and magazine coverage from his heyday, made possible a really strong nomination that establishes Pepper's significant influence on the development of jazz rock fusion and world music. Sandy Osawa in particular, and you'll see this in the nomination, stressed that Jim Pepper and his melding of Indigenous tradition with popular music challenges prevailing racist ideas about what it means to be an Indigenous artist. His work resists categorization, and it's both deeply referential to his Indigenous heritage and completely his own. Two elements of this nomination that might warrant some explanation on the part of the preparer are the identification of the house as eligible under Criterion B, and then the end date for the period of significance. So first, while it might not be common for an artist's family home to be nominated under Criterion B, the Pepper family, Pepper's collaborators, and our nomination team, which includes Sean Cruz, who's here today, strongly feel that the Pepper House is the best representation in Portland within a local context of Jim Pepper's development as an artist. So he maintained a lifelong connection with this space, like ever since he was a child. It's where he honed his talents, beginning at a young age. It's where he learned from and collaborated with his father, who had such a major impact on his music. It's where he wrote or workshopped most of his groundbreaking pieces. And it's where he returned again and again over the course of his life for comfort and creativity and community, which is what really fueled his work. He played all over Portland, all over the world. Really, he played a lot in Europe. He traveled to Africa, all over the country. But we feel that no other place is as closely or consistently associated with his development as a musician or with his productive period as an artist. This consistency, the consistency of that association over his life, actually presented a challenge in determining the end date for the period of significance for the property, because Jim Pepper truly maintained this association through his death in 1992. He returned to Portland before his death. He was performing almost up until he entered hospice care, and then he died in the home. So our team, in consultation with Robert, referred to National Register Bulletin 16A, how to complete the National Register form. And we chose to approach the period of significance from the idea of when did this property achieve significance? So not when did the significant association conclude, but by what time was the significant association achieved? So the answer to that question was much clearer to us. Pepper's album, Pepper's Powwow, which Robert just showed photos of, it was released in 1971, and this was really the first full realization of Pepper's genre blending synthesis of jazz and rock music and native tradition. So through our oral history interviews, we learned that much of Pepper's powwow, much of this album, including his seminal single, Witchy Tai Toe, was written or at least honed or workshopped in the house, in that living room that Robert showed a picture of. So although the studio recording was actually completed in New York, the Pepper House in Portland is an integral part of the story of this album, and the album is part of the story of the house. So at the time that the album was released to critical acclaim in 1971, the house therefore achieved the significance that qualifies it for eligibility in the National Register under Criterion B. So hopefully this statement gives some clarity to the major decisions that went into structuring this nomination. I'm looking forward to hearing from Sean, but first I just want to say thank you again to the members of the committee for spending the time to review this. And thank you to everyone, people who are here and not here, for contributing to it.
Thank you, Caitlin. I'll turn it over to Sean. Like to say something about the application?
Sure, yeah, thank you. I'd love to. There's a whole lot of things that had to happen, like in a miraculous way, for this whole proceeding to come forward. And so many ways this whole history could have been lost. But in between 2000 and 2002, I was a real estate broker, and I got a call from a developer friend of mine one day. And he said he had this property they were going to partition and build on, and he wanted me to sell the old house. So I came over here, and the house had, the developer had just let the house sit vacant, but there was something about it that was speaking to me, and I was interested in it. And but the same day that the for sale sign went out, I was here, and there was a lady that stopped and said she'd be back with a realtor, and she was, and they made an offer and was accepted the next day. So it was gone that fast. However, we came to learn that the partition wasn't finalized. So seller couldn't close, and the buyer didn't want to wait around. So then I made an offer on the house to match what they just agreed to, and I was willing to wait. And I didn't know anything about the history of the house. All I knew, the seller owned it. That's the only thing I knew. But there was something about the house I was feeling. It was speaking to me somehow. And I met the lady on the corner, asked me if I knew the history of the house. Well, no. And she said, well, this was the Pepper family home for 50 years. Floyd Pepper, the educator, her son Jim Pepper, the musician. And I was aware of them both by reputation, but had never met them. And Jim had passed in 1992, and I didn't move into Portland in 96. Our paths didn't cross, or at least I didn't think they had. Anyhow, so it was cool to know that. And then one day I was standing in the front yard, and this car stopped, and the lady said, "Hi, my name's Susie. We used to live here. Wonder if we could see the old house again." And I gave them a look, and she said, "My mom would love to see the old house again. Could I bring my mom?" And she did. The next week, Floyd Pepper, she was in her mid-80s, and we had a nice visit, and she gave me a gift. And it was her bootleg CD of her son's first LP under his own name, Jim Pepper's Powwow, 1971. And it has a different cover on it than the one that you saw, because of course it was a bootleg. And anyhow, at that point, I had no idea if I'd ever seen or heard Jim Pepper or his music. And but I put it on as soon as they left. And first track is a traditional powwow chant. There's no band music there. And the second track started to play, and I was thinking, I know this, I've heard this before, and I wonder who this is, and I'm looking at it to see who's on there. And I recognized some of the names. Larry Coryell was on there. And I thought about the one time that I saw Larry Coryell live, which was about 1970. I was a music major at Sonoma State at the time, and I was there at this concert because I'd heard him on Herbie Mann's Memphis Underground album. I want to play guitar like that guy. And they were opening for Chuck Berry, and it wasn't in a club, it was a roller rink, San Rafael, Marin County. And The crowd was there for Chuck Berry, and they had no patience at all for the opening band. They did not dig it at all, but they were fantastic players. And there came a point where after a song, nobody was clapping, and somebody hollered out at Larry Coryell, "My kid's sister can play guitar better than you." And you could hear that everywhere. It was like that. And Coryell says, "I want to feature my tenor player on this next song. He's an Indian, a real Indian." And I already knew they were great, you know, and he comes to the front of the stage and he starts playing this song. And it's the one I'm listening to right now. And he took over the room with it. They absolutely did. Everybody took over the room with it. I'd never seen anything like it. And yeah, and I remember the sound of his horn. 30 years later, I remember the sound of his horn. It was unmistakable. And if she hadn't given me that CD, I don't think we'd be on this path right now. But anyhow, I saw that. And after the concert, my girlfriend and I didn't drive north to Sonoma to go home. We drove into San Francisco because Tower Record was open all night. And I had to find that tenor player in that song, like right now. This was not going to wait. And as it turned out, I couldn't remember his name. I just knew what he looked like and what he sounded like, and he was in Coryell's band. And I actually bought the LP that night that he was on, but as a flute player, and there were no pictures of the band. And so years went by, and eventually I gave up looking for him. And but I only had to hear that one time, and I knew exactly who this was. And so there was that. And then later that year, 2002, Senator Abel Gordley hired me to be her legislative staff. And I began that job in January. And then Pepper's music was all out of print, and there wasn't very much of it on YouTube. It was hard to find. And I really didn't have much more than the CD that Floyd gave me. But the 2005 Portland Jazz Festival was in part dedicated to Pepper. And there was a lecture at the library, and there was a showing of Sandy Osawa's documentary, Pepper's Powwow at Portland State, that had been shown nationwide on PBS. It's an award-winning documentary. And I saw that, and Jim and Floyd and Jim's partner Karen were all interviewed in the documentary. And the curtains that was hanging behind their heads in the interviews were still hanging in the house when I bought it. And you know, here's Jim and his dad in the kitchen and all that. And there was a postcard they showed from Jim sent to his mom from West Africa, where he and Don Cherry were on a U.S. State Department tour, you know, playing in African villages. And then, but the thing that really set me on this path was hearing the Jim Pepper Remembrance Band perform in the festival. And it was the first time I was ever hearing Jim's music performed as a body of work. And of course, I was hearing songs that weren't on the CD, and you know, played by a great band. And that changed everything. I came out of there. It's the first time I said this, is I've been listening to jazz my entire adult life, and I've never heard music like this. And I said, I know that this music is important in a musicological sense, that in the history of music, this music has its own place. I know that. And I walked out of the building saying those things. And Senator Gordley and I were carpool to the Capitol every day. And on the way in, I was telling her about what I heard last night. And she remembered Jim Pepper. And so she tasked me to research and draft what became Senate Joint Resolution 31, honoring the life and achievements of Jim Pepper. And that passed and in 2005. And then a whole year went by. I got into 2006 and I was waiting to hear those songs again, and nobody was playing them. And the Remembrance Band had just assembled for that one concert. They came from New York and Atlanta and other places, as well as here in Portland. And so finally I couldn't stand it any longer. So I got in touch with the leaders and I ended up booking them into a club in Portland, just because I needed to hear those songs again. I had no plans to be in the music business at all. And Oregon Art Beat showed up. And so they filmed part of that. And then they wanted to interview Floyd, and she wanted to be interviewed here in the house. And so, you know, that happened. And yeah, that happened. And in 2007, Jim's family donated his saxophone and other memorabilia to the National Museum of the American Indian in Washington, D.C. And they asked me to travel back there and speak for them, and which I did. And it was a tremendous honoring. And it was there when I really came to understand how Jim Pepper is seen outside of Portland, outside of Oregon, you know, out there in the world, as people came from everywhere for that. And also became aware that Gunther Schuller, winner of the Pulitzer Prize for Music, he won the prize in 1996, and in 2000, he arranged, conducted, recorded a tribute to Jim Pepper in Cologne, Germany, featuring the full orchestra, another version of the Jim Pepper Remembrance Band, and they brought the Yellowhammer, these punk powwow singers from Oklahoma that used to tour with Jim, there for that recording too. I mean, it's 2 hours of music, and so I wasn't the only one that felt that this music is important in a musicological way, and that was fantastic to see. Yeah, and then and I made a promise to Floyd that I would do all I could to see that her son got the recognition he deserved, because I came to really love his music, and I formed a nonprofit that became the Jim Pepper Native Arts Council, and we're headquartered here, and we began producing an annual Jim Pepper Native Arts Festivals in Portland, and we've just done our 10th, and we're also, our mission is improve access to culturally relevant music education in Jim Pepper's name, but also reflecting the educational legacy of his mother, Floyd Pepper, who was and continues to be an important influence in Indian education, not just in Oregon, but elsewhere. And so we raised funds and hired a team of Native educators based in Southern Oregon University to write a curriculum, which they have done. 4 years curriculum for grades 9 through 12. It's a music education program that we're about to start piloting in Portland, and it's tied to Oregon State standards in several disciplines, and it's an actual multidisciplinary course. And anyhow, with that, we're going to embed Jim Pepper's music in the K-12 repertoire. And so that is happening now. And we're really gratified for this proceeding to be happening. And also my plan is that after me, then the house will become the property of the council, so that we can ensure that it'll always be appreciated and nobody's ever going to tear it down. And thank you.
Do I go last or first?
Probably went first. Doesn't matter. Would
Okay,
you like to go first or last?
sure, it doesn't matter. Okay. So I had a similar experience. I had never heard this music before until I was reviewing this nomination, and I was totally floored by it. I never heard anything. It was, I mean, obviously very innovative and original and unique, and so that just right off the bat, that really impressed me. So that set the stage for me to really appreciate this nomination. And I appreciate the efforts of the preparer and Mr. Cruz, and also my colleague, Dr. Brooke Hawley at Southern Oregon University, who's working on this educational curriculum. So, and this is one of my favorite kind of nominations, as it emphasizes the place in terms of historic place. And to me, it's like a really Oregon story in so many ways. It intersects so many things. And not just the sort of individuality of the music, but like this kind of southern migration that we were just thinking about, and people coming to, or not just southern migration, but people coming to Oregon, in this case from Oklahoma, to sort of find opportunity and do something new. It intersects stories like the Shamawa Indian School, which is the boarding school that's such a big part of Oregon's history. They lived in Vanport for a little while. It's another major part of our history. It's interesting. You spoke about the idea that this was a musician's house and not the recording studio or the performance venue. And it never occurred to me that that wasn't appropriate because of the emphasis on the family lineage. While I was reading it, just the emphasis on the context of Indigenous families and families generally for producing this kind of music. So to me, that was seamless. That was a seamless part of this. And then I guess most importantly, intersects, the Oregon story of Indigenous survivance through settler colonialism, and also thrivance, thriving, a unique way that Indigenous communities can thrive through the efforts of somebody like this musician. So I guess you could tell I kind of really enjoyed reading this, and I thought it was a good nomination and a really worthwhile nomination. So there's only one little technical thing, just like the last nomination, 3 and 4 are not filled out, but that's a very minor thing. So that's my take on the nomination.
Thank you, Mark. Let's go to Jackie.
I also did not know much about Jim Pepper as a musician until I read through this nomination, and it got me really curious. And luckily now there is music and videos available online that I could look at and see him perform. So that was quite good to be able to do. And I do think it's a well-written nomination and very interesting, and it piques my interest in learning more about him.
Steve?
I think it's excellent and really for me a revelation, partly because I don't know anything about jazz, and so this was all new, and I very much enjoyed reading it. And, it's very succinct. I haven't yet, and I'm going to when I get back home. Having been on the internet now for years.
Welcome. All right, John, would you like to go?
Yeah, sure. So I've got a big zoom out question, and I don't want to throw everything off here, but I appreciated learning so much about this. I'm really into music, but I didn't know Jim Pepper, and it made me think, after I read this nomination and after you spoke, Caitlin and Sean, is this truly just local significance? And that's my throw off question. And it may be, and maybe we stay there, but there is a lot here. There's recognition in the Museum of the American Indian. There were some other things you mentioned, Sean, in Oklahoma. It seems that Jim, for this genre of music, both native music and jazz, and sort of the hybrid of the two that he was working on, is world renowned. So I saw, just from what I read and heard, a larger story here. I mean, the other thing I'm thinking a lot about is we're used to seeing native monuments and cultural heritage in more rural areas. We rarely see urban native heritage. And it's not that it's not there. We're just not seeing it on the commission. I know we do have some things, and other states do too, but it may be the rarest of that I'm used to seeing. And so that's something. A few other thoughts I had were, because there's so much social and cultural history tied to this, like our previous nominations, and since you have these connections, Sean, with the family, if these connections persist, are there any photos of Jim recording, performing, other gatherings in the home, since it was such a community space for that? Caitlin, you mentioned these oral histories, and I feel like every time everyone mentions these, I always wonder if there's a way for other people to access that. And that may just be recordings in a hard drive and not necessarily anything else. But like, these are all like digital projects that in my mind, I'm like, oh, this would be great. Final thing is, Sean, you mentioned this resolution, and you also mentioned this curriculum. For the sake of just record keeping, even if the National Park Service, if it moves forward, doesn't click on the link, I think it'd be good to include that link, because anyone finding this later, years from now, looking at urban native history, would be able to click that, and hopefully it still exists. Otherwise, it might be harder for, I'm just like trying to zoom it all into one packet. So whatever PDFs look like in 20 years will be comprehensive.
Oh, yeah, yeah. Thank you, John. Actually, there's a lot of Jim Pepper on YouTube now, and including concerts. You can see him perform in Berlin and other places. He actually found his audience in Europe. He was much more appreciated in Europe than he was in the United States, and that's not that uncommon, particularly for jazz players and people of color. And yeah, and signs of present day native habitation are rare. They are. And that's another reason why it's important to have something that shows that Indians actually are here, you know, and that's an important part of the story.
John, I'd like to add that the Senate resolution is included in the nomination as one of the figures, so that will be kept in. Oh, I can't remember exactly which figure, but it's at the back. And then one thing that I think wasn't expressed because the Portland Historic Landmarks Commission didn't submit their comments in time. We had also talked with both them and with Robert about the level of significance. And our thought in going with local was that the context surrounding it, the story of Jim Pepper's life, was centered in Portland, and we didn't want to preclude maybe other sites that are associated with him. Also, national level of significance is incredibly high bar. So we felt comfortable with local for this.
Oh, you know what? I forgot.
Oh, yeah.
Well, I forgot Joy Harjo, U.S. Poet Laureate. She plays Witchy Taito, and she credits Jim Pepper with giving her, she says, a context for the saxophone she plays. She said she was actually ready to give up the saxophone when she met him. And yeah.
There's some I think there's a block quote, there's some wonderful words from her in the nomination too, about what an inspiration Jim Pepper was to her. And again, about how he was like boundary breaking in terms of stereotype breaking and like in terms of what it was to be an Indigenous artist. But
well,
it is.
No worries about the national. When I read it, I thought there's a reason why this is staying local, and I'm sure that conversation has happened, but I'm sure it's a future MPD on urban native, like
Be incredible.
There's something else here that's bigger than this for sure.
Yeah. I always believed that Jim Pepper was a big Portland story, a big Oregon story, and a big national story. I always believed that. And we'll see.
Can you guys still hear us?
Yeah.
Okay. Gwen, do you have any comments to add?
Hi, yes, I do. It was very enjoyable reading it, and I will be going out to connect with the video and with the music. I wonder And thank you for putting your time and energy and passion into the work. I think about the connection to redlining in Oregon. I know that the Native people as well as Black people, realtors weren't allowed to show homes. So the idea that they had this space, it would be a really, there's a connection there, is to how and getting a space that it's been worked on, and if there's some way to connect it to Oregon's exclusion laws, because that's part of it's not our legacy, but we get to drag it behind us in the spaces in different ways. So wondered if you had any input or content on that. And I just think about also the connection. You talk about how it's connected, and I think about it as this moves forward to look at keyword searches for this, and based on, again, it's that local significance and the impact, and how did they move around that exclusionary piece. It's during the time that it's pretty prevalent for Native people, and we're easier, Black people are easier to identify. And so I have not seen pictures or anything of him before today, but that's all, it's just it's part of the work we do. Other than that, I really enjoyed reading it. I'm jazzed. That's, I don't mean to go there, but I'm jazzed to hear more about it and to dig into that. But those are the comments that I have for it. Other than that, in what's been said before me, I don't have any other input.
Caitlin or Sean, did either of you come across any of that inclusionary laws or discrimination with the Peppers, getting this house originally?
So in a more general sense, I think the first subsection of section 8, there's a block quote from Floyd Pepper from an article that she wrote discussing some of the challenges that they faced, particularly after leaving Salem, moving up to Portland and trying to find property. So I did not, I think, specifically use the word redlining. I need to go back and check. But there is some context about the general racism that they faced as Indigenous people in Oregon. And that's part of the context that's explained in there, why they purchased outside of Portland proper at the time. At the time, Park Rose was outside of the city limits.
Great.
I think that there's definitely a connection to Oregon. It's not being inside or outside, it's an Oregon exclusion. And so to make that tie-in, I think that would be really significant and supportive of what's not being talked about. Thank you.
Thanks, Gwen.
Yeah. Well, a mark of the barriers I've seen is that here's a musician, he's the only Oregon musician whose instrument resides in a glass case in the Smithsonian Museum, and has achieved all of this international appreciation, and yet he's pretty much unknown in his own home state. And there it is.
And for Black people, we've been going to Europe forever to survive and to have those. So it really resounds with me when you say that. We've had to leave our country. And when I say our country, it was years before it was any of ours.
Yeah,
So I appreciate it.
yeah, the barriers are, still exist. You know, there is no venue anywhere that I know of in Oregon, certainly not in the Portland metro area, that features Native musicians working in any genre in any regular way. It's never existed. Nowhere.
Thanks,
So-
Sean.
I'm in rural Oregon, and by the way, we welcome and encourage that within a lot of the works that we do here. So I hope that you don't always think that it's never and ever, because there are things that are happening. We just don't get to hear about it all the time.
True that.
All right, thank you.
I think my only other comments that haven't been touched on by other people are, I'm the visual person. I love to see those historic photos. So if there are any photos, again, not necessarily of the house, but I agree as the other members have said about, the interactions, and we had a couple of those good photos included of Jim Pepper as a kid playing, but there just seems like there's got to be some other photos out there. And then that we could include in this. And then my big question is, how do we include these oral heritage, documentations as well as the music into this nomination? I mean, I know, Chrissy, you were talking about digitizing and making everything electronic, but without hearing that, I mean, we're missing a big gap of the significance of this nomination is the audible portion of it. And there's been a lot of documentation and history done with this. So how do you connect that? There's a new link on the new website, right? That we can link to these files or something? Yes? You're gonna say yes?
No,
Heidi?
I'm not gonna say yes, Heidi, there are, but interestingly, back a long time ago, we listed in Sherman County, a park for a musical group, and their name completely is slipping my mind right now. It's on the tip of my brain. And we talked about that. And back then there wasn't YouTube or links or interwebs or internets or anything. So it feels like there's an opportunity here to think about that and to figure something out when you have a nomination that would be, and also the Ernest Block House as well. I mean, we've had some really important musicians places listed. So how do we connect the sound to that story, which is so we ought to start thinking about that. But like, I think it was Sean or it was John actually, who mentioned technology is, we can link it now. Is it going to be even the same thing in 10 years? So how do we do something in a lasting way?
How would we possibly listen to a floppy disk right now?
Right. Precisely.
Not listen to, I don't think there was any audio. Anyway, any closing comments, Mark, or anything else you'd like to touch
You
on?
missed Julie.
Oh, Julie, I'm so sorry.
That's no problem. I echo what everybody said, and I love this nomination. That was my comment on the front sheet. It's just inspiring in many ways. So thank you.
Thank you, Julie. John?
Just one more thing. I do a lot of digital projects, and these things take a long time, and they like digital humanities work, and they require a lot of permissions and things like that. So I'm just trying to think of a quick way where something like this can be included in the nomination, and maybe it is a series of links that are like the most representative, whether they're like Hallmark concerts or award like events that were recorded, or even anything that's been put up from the family, if we don't have any actual images, because I think the National Park Service may say if all these, and it's not just this project, this nomination, Sean and Caitlin, but if all of these sites have so much social significance, why did anyone not record any of that? And I know things were different back then, but like whether that's moving or like fixed photos, so we might counter the importance of that social that no one ever captured if so much was happening at this house. So it would be worth trying to find something like that. And maybe some of that's already included in this curriculum you mentioned, Sean, that you mentioned a group in Southern Oregon that did that. So it might be built into something's already that's been done. But I think I'm just trying to think of the best way to give them a scope and saying it goes beyond Portland, even though it's local significance.
Okay, Mark?
I move that we recommend that this nomination be forwarded to the gatekeeper.
Come on.
Yeah, I would love to send you a list of URLs of links that would be just fantastic, including at the National Museum of the American Indian, the actual ceremony when you can hear what Dr. Rick West has to say. And then there's a wonderful concert in Berlin, 1980, I think it was, with Charlie Hayden's Liberation Music Orchestra. And you can hear in that clip why, of all the other saxophone players out there, they wanted Jim, because there's nobody that sounds like Jim Pepper. And
So-
yeah, absolutely unique.
I want to second the motion.
We have Mark made a motion and he's accepting the friendly amendment to possibly add some sound bites to the nomination if we can figure out technically how to do that. Is that correct? Okay, and then we have a second from Gwen. Gwen, would you like to second the friendly amendments too?
Yes, I want to second the motion with the friendly amendments, please.
Perfect, thank you. Any
All right.
discussion of the motion or that's on the table?
Mm-mm.
Go ahead and take a vote. All those in favor? Aye, or hands up?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, our three members on the screen have hands up. I will say aye as well. So unanimously. I don't have to say any opposed because everybody just said aye. Perfect. Thank you for a very well-written nomination, and this is a super exciting nomination that we will forward to the keeper of the National Register.
Gatekeeper.
It's gonna be gatekeeper from now on. Yes. Thank you very much, Caitlin and Steve. All right.
Thank you.